What's up, Wizards? It's Dev. Mtg, he's a magic man, and the time has finally arrived. You can sit back, crack something open, chill on the couch with your dude, and we'll talk about the top 25 cards in Zendikar Rising. Shortest intro ever, I know, but I wanted to keep this one tight because I have a lot to say about Zendikar Rising. At time of recording, we've only had like 2 days to play with this set in Standard. Really just 1 day because, you know, launch day on Arena. RIP, that happened. So we've had very little time to discuss, much less play with these cards in Standard. But that said, before we got to play with the cards, I'd already rewritten the list like 6 times. And now that we've gotten to play with the cards, I've rewritten the list another 3 times. So I think I finally hammered it into a shape that I can be proud to present and not feel like a total jerk on the YouTube website. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Talk about the top 25 cards in Zendikar. Some good Zendikar cards. But first, before we do that, if you will allow me quickly to get my bread. I'm sorry if you are annoyed by these parts of videos, but if you would just like and subscribe, that would be awesome. We got a lot of content coming up. Deck Techs, blah, blah. So make sure you do that. You can also check out the Patreon, link in the description if you want to help vote on the content we do this season. And you can watch me play Magic on Twitch at twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. Last thing, if you think any of these cards are good cards and you might want to have a few copies of them, check the first link in the description. Go to my dudes at TCG Player. They'll help you out with that. Lowest prices on the internet. Might as well go there. They're pretty good at having low prices, but that's the whole pitch. I am terrible at self-promotion, but that's the entire pitch. That's all you have to worry about for now. We're going to go through 25, really like 30 straight good Zendikar cards here. So strap in, get comfortable. Let's do this. Actually, if you'll forgive me, I should say this at the beginning of every top 25 video, so I'm going to go ahead and clear this up while I can. But you know, I don't do top 10 standard cards, top 10 commander cards, top 10 pauper cards, historic, pioneer, modern. I don't farm content in that way. Maybe I should be smart enough to do that myself. Maybe I should. But usually, a card's position on one of my top 25 lists is kind of an aggregate of how good it is in multiple formats. That said, I know that I have a tendency to weight standard really highly because I'm a standard guy, so I have that weakness. Just know that. But at the end of the day, it's my list, and I get to be excited about what cards I want to be excited about. So that said, I try to stay as objective as I possibly can when I'm making these lists, and I agonize over them, and I always rewrite them a dozen times, as I have done here. So I hope you enjoyed the list. Let's get into it with the honorable mentions. Now, I've allowed myself 3 honorable mentions for this video, and I'll try to get through them relatively fast here. First of all, flip duels. Flip duels are good, right? But they'd be kind of a boring entry in the list. But these kind of de facto replace Shocklands, so they're important cards. Just remember that. I like these. Second of all, Forsaken Monument. I don't know how good this card's actually going to be in Standard, but it might be really good in Commander. That said, we lost some important pieces for the colorless deck to rotation, but we still have a lot of really good pieces for the colorless deck too, and this might help out even more than something like Mystic Forge ever did. So I got my eye on Forsaken Monument, but I don't have all the faith in the world in it. That said, final honorable mention is one that might actually tilt some people right off the bat, and that's Zareth San. Now, I don't mean this as a slight, because I think some people are going to take this as a bit of a jab that this made honorable mention and not the actual list, but I got some reservations about this. I'm not even sure that the Rogues deck wants to go all the way up to 4 or even 5 on the curve. 5 if it wants to cast this naturally, right? So although the Flash might be the saving grace on this, and there's probably going to be a few situations where people steal really gnarly creatures out of their opponent's graveyard with it, I'm still not sure I have all the faith in the world that Rogues has the ability to squeeze this in. But on to the actual list part of the list video here. Number 25. I'm going to kick it off with 2 of my favorite cards in the set. That's right, I said 2. I'm going to cheat with the very first entry here, but I'm not even going to say they're similar cards, but you'll see what I mean when I tell you what it is. Number 25 is Maddening Cacophony, but it's also Ruin Crab, right? Are we going to do Fixed Hedron Crab, right? Or do we want half Glimpse the Unthinkable, half Traumatized? Why not both, right? Mill players love both of these cards being in the set, especially in a format that has, like, the Fairies Tutelage. It's ridiculous. So, like, is Mill actually a thing because these 2 cards exist? I can tell you I'm already playing Ruin Crab Simic if you haven't seen some of the pictures I've posted to Twitter. The deck is crazy. I'm just playing 4 copies of Tutelage, 4 copies of Ruin Crab, and a ton of ramp. And it turns out that just works. There's going to be turns, and I've already experienced this, where you have 2 crabs out and you just end up milling them for 40 cards in 1 turn. Ruin Crab is absolutely ridiculous, but so is Cacophony. You know, for just 2 mana, 8 cards isn't so bad in your mill deck, but for that extra kicker, Traumatize, that is much, much better. And I imagine that Mono Blue and Simic and Blue-Black mill decks, all of them, are probably going to play 4 copies of each of these cards. But is that going to be enough to make mill real? I don't know. You never know, right? We always think it's going to be real, and it's terrible. So I guess we'll see. But moving on to number 24, let's talk about Grakmaw. I kind of think some people are going to be upset that it's all the way down here at 24, and it's not a little bit higher up the list. But honestly, Grakmaw almost didn't make the list at all. If you can't tell by his position here, but I am kind of excited about this in a lot of ways, right? It replaces itself when it does get removed. Sometimes you get a really big creature out of it. If you've made a 6/6 Grakmaw in some way, and then they kill it, you get a 6/6 back. It's like a worm coil engine. It's a good deal, right? But at the same time, there are ways your opponent can kill this without you getting any value. Heartless Act actually kills this if it only has 3 counters on it, and you don't even get a thing back, because Heartless Act removed the counters. It has to have counters on it when it dies in order to get a thing for you. So, yeah, that's kind of weird that Heartless Act counterintuitively works very well against a dry, just a 3/3 Grakmaw. But even when it's relatively big, there's no keywords on this card whatsoever. It's just a vanilla dude that gets you another vanilla dude when it dies, and requires a little bit of work for it to actually be, decent, right? If you put, 1 or 2 counters on this, it's a 5/5, dies, you get a 5/5 back. I do think that's very powerful, but at the same time, it requires work to get there. I think a lot of the decks that want to play this card are Abzan. That's 3 colors, and yeah, we got to Triumph for it, but it's not going to be the easiest mana in the world. And all that work, all the hoops that you jump through, you get a vanilla dude. I'm just not too sure about it, but again, it is definitely worthy of consideration enough to make the list. It's a good Magic card. Now, number 23 is Nighthawk Scavenger, also known as Tarmohawk, which is one of my favorite nicknames for a card in a while. It's kind of a Tarmogoyf. Kind of a Vampire Nighthawk, but it has the ability to be better than both of them. Of course, it also has the ability to be worse than both of them, but you've added a mana to Tarmogoyf's casting cost to give it 3 keyword abilities. Seems good. But you've also kept Vampire Nighthawk at the same mana cost while giving it a lower floor, but a much higher ceiling, right? It scales so much better than Vampire Nighthawk because it scales in the first place. So it seems like a winning card to me, but I'll admit it's a little bit narrow. Right, it's probably only going to go in a deck or 2 in Standard, and might not make it into Modern, where even though we have fetch lands and spells getting slung like crazy on the first couple of turns to make this thing bigger, I'm still not sure that it's not a smidge too slow for older formats. That said, Standard Historic might love a card like this, right? But at the same time, there's not too many decks that are going to play this thing outside of Blue-Black Rogues and a mill deck here or there. So again, I think the card is slightly too narrow to make it into the top 20 or top 10 or whatever, but it is still definitely a card I'm really excited about from this set. Number 22 is Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats. I'm pretty sure I've exhausted all the Persona 5 jokes I can make about this already, so let's just get serious about this card. I've seen this on multiple content creators' top 10 lists for this set, and I'm not ready to put it there yet, but I will say that the card is pretty much fair at any rate. I don't want to pay 6 mana for it, but if you just got Wrathed, and you top deck this and you have the mana to play it, this 4/4 haste guy, sometimes I'll just kill the opponent on the spot. So, having an evasive flying dude is always pretty nice off the top of your library, no matter what you have to pay for it. Even if you only have 1 creature in your party, 5 mana for this is kind of just a fair rate, but anytime you have more than that, you have 2 creatures in your party, 3 creatures in your party, the thing gets absolutely unbelievable, right? If you're only paying 3 or maybe 4 mana for this, I think it's actually one of the better, more efficient and aggressive creatures in Standard. I like that in a party deck, you can spend your first 3 turns getting party members out, and then play this on turn 4 and swing with it. I can't be too high on them, but just in terms of rate for what you're getting, pretty much every rate you can pay for them is at least fair, and if it's not fair, it's incredibly busted. Number 21 is Luminarch Aspirant. This card actually started way lower down on the list, right? This was in the top 15 to begin with, but as I've looked at other cards and kind of evaluated them for other formats, this card gets higher and higher up here, right? Now it's not even in the top 20, which is kind of disappointing to me, because obviously the card goes in Selesnya counters, Abzan counters, black-white clerics very likely. It goes in multiple modern decks. It goes in decks that in historic, just anything +1/+1 counter based. Will very much love this card, and it has a lot of really cool interactions with Conclave Mentor and Orin Refus and all this cool stuff in Standard. So I do love this card, but at the end of the day, it can get killed by a 1 damage thing before it actually puts a counter on itself, which is usually is going to do. One of the cool things about this is that it goes ahead and does something the turn that it enters the battlefield, but I think most of the time it's going to put the counter on itself. And if it doesn't put the counter on itself, then you just paid 2 mana for your 1/1. Super easy to kill. Even if it does put the counter on itself, it can get shocked. All kinds of things that people are doing in this format right now. Shocked, bone crushed, whatever. So I just don't have all the faith in the world in this card, but if it does have a couple of turns to do its work, then it can start doing some really powerful work, especially if you surrounded it with supportive pieces. So I do love this card, but sometimes I think it's a little bit too slow for its own good. That said, if it sounds like I'm bad-mouthing the first 5 cards on this list, just remember that they made the list, and there were a bunch of cards that I wanted to make the list that didn't. There were 38 cards on this list when I first started and had to whittle it down to 25, so there were at least like 50 cards in the set that I think are good and we'll see play in multiple formats. So just making the list means that I have some faith in you. I just don't have as much faith in these first 5 cards as I do in my top 20, so let's get to that. And number 20 is Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. Now, I'm not really sure what to think about this card, all things considered, but it is 5 mana to, in some cases, double your mana, and we just had a card that did that in the last format, and it was kind of a problem, if you remember. So this one requires that you have a bunch of creatures out for it to give you a whole lot more mana, but there's still plenty of board states that are easy to imagine where you play this on turn 5, untap on turn 6. If you didn't get Wrath, now you have 1 billion mana, right? So, because all your creatures are forests. They all tap for green mana. By the way, that also means that when you play a creature, it triggers landfall if you've got any landfall dudes around. So pretty much every card in your deck can trigger landfall now thanks to Shaya. This will be a great commander, which did influence its position on the list a bit, but I'm more worried about this in Standard, where if it stays out for a turn or you don't get Wrath, you still got dudes out when you untap with it. Suddenly you've got a Nissa who shakes the world situation on your hands, and that's too much mana. It is too much mana. I'm sick of it and I want it to stop. And since I'm scared of it, I feel like it kind of has to be on the list. Number 19, I got a card that goes right along with the Shaya, and that's Ancient Green Warden. Now, this is a little bit better than a Shaya to my estimation, because I think it's just way more abusable if you have the right board state for it, right? Just being able to double up landfall triggers is pretty dope, but if you're playing like a Gitrog monster deck in EDH or something, you can play your lands that you sacrifice to monster out of the graveyard, and those will trigger extra landfall things. And if you happen to be playing Field of the Dead in any format where you can still do that, this card's pretty good there, but just land Harmonicon. That's all you gotta say. This is a land Harmonicon, so it absolutely deserves to be on the list. Even though I guess Panharmonicon itself was kind of a janky card that didn't do a whole lot last time it was in Standard outside of 1 or 2 niche decks here or there. But that said, a more expensive Panharmonicon can't be worse, right? A more expensive, more narrow Panharmonicon. It's a Panharmonicon that can attack and has reach for no reason, because it's a green creature and has reach. So, and at least it has a keyword ability and a decent stat line, giant butt. I like a lot of things about this card, but mostly, obviously, kind of a jank lord if you haven't noticed that by following the channel recently. I love some dirty, gross stuff that's probably a little bit too expensive for Standard in the long run, but that said, the card is way too fun to not land on my list somewhere. At number 18, might surprise you, Myriad Construct. I love this card so much. I love this card so much. And I actually went through why I love it so much not too long ago, because it was one of the last few rares spoiled in the set. But yeah, it's kind of a hangerback walker. Sort of. You look at it sideways, hangerback walker. If you kick it, in most formats, it's going to be huge when it enters the battlefield, because there's an awful lot of non-basic lands going around in literally every Magic format right now. I was going to just say Standard, but yeah, in every Magic format. If you kick this, it'll be huge. And when they do kill it, it bursts into 1 billion pieces. Also note that, yeah, they can sweep it and it won't blow up into pieces, but if they try to bounce it back to your hand or exile it or kill it or whatever, like literally anything besides a non-targeted mass removal spell, is going to break this into at least 4 dudes, if not more, which is crazy. Like, it's unbelievable how big of a board you can establish with a card like this. Works really good against, say, Teamer Adventures, but it could also work well against Ugin decks because it's colorless and it sticks around after Ugin does its thing. So I think there's a lot of interesting little niches for this card in Standard right now, and it probably has a place to go. Even if it's just in like a mid-range deck, or something like that, just a boring old mid-range deck, or hey, maybe that all-colorless deck I was talking about earlier. There are plenty of homes for this right now, and it wouldn't surprise me if this was a deceptively powerful card, so it's made its way a good ways up my list. Number 17 is Seagate Stormcaller, another card that I've seen multiple content creators put, not just in their top 10, but in their top 5 in some cases. And I wish I had that much faith in this card, but we've seen like Snapcaster Mage variants in the past that didn't end up doing a whole heck of a lot. So I want to have more faith in this, but I just don't. I feel like you're probably not going to kick it too often, but even just ignoring the kicker, the card is at least decent. Again, anything that makes the list, I think, is pretty good. Seagate Stormcaller is absolutely no, exception to that rule. Just being able to recast an Opt or a Shock or even like a 2-mana thing at the cost of a total of 4 mana that also gets you a body is not bad. Now, I say recast. Obviously, it's copy, but I'm still thinking in terms of Snapcaster. But just being able to copy your next like 1 or 2 mana spell at a reasonable cost ain't bad, Jack. So I do like the card. I'm just not really sure what it slots into, because even the decks that it looks like it slots into, like Is It Spells, don't really want to play that many creatures, and they actually got better creatures in this set to play than Seagate Stormcaller, believe it or not. We'll cover that a little bit later, but still, I'm just not sure what this goes in even after a few days of playing, because it looks like a lot of people want to be ramping. And also blue-black roguing in this format right now. We still know that mono-red, even mono-white aggro, that the life gain deck, those are good decks. We know that the Teamer Adventures is a good deck. We know Simic Ramp is a good deck, but none of those decks are going to want to play this card, so I'm not sure it's going to find a home anytime soon, but it's obviously, just on its face, based on its text box and casting cost, a very powerful Magic card to look out for in multiple formats. Number 16 is Kargan Intimidator, and I don't think this is going to see all the play in the world outside of Standard, and maybe Historic. Do I dare say Modern? It's not good. It's probably not good enough for Modern, but still. At least Standard and Historic, I imagine this is going to see a fair amount of play, not only in the Warriors decks that it obviously goes in, but even just in mono-red aggro decks and whatnot, because it seems like a pretty dope 2-drop, right? Look at all the stuff this card does at a decent stat line, and it can get even bigger than its natural stat line. So for just 2 mana with some relevant creature types, it's kind of a boring creature in a way, because it's just obviously that good. So like, it's got to be on the list somewhere. I just felt like there were a lot more exciting cards to talk about with the next 15, 16 slots on the list, but at the same time, the card's obviously solid enough to make the list, because we're probably going to be seeing a fair amount of it for the next couple of years. Really solid 2-drop aggressive creature here. This slot almost went to a Koem Hellhound, but I also felt like Hellhound was slightly boring, and everyone knows it's going to see play in like 4 different formats, so I guess this slot is kind of Kargan Intimidator / a Koem Hellhound, so remember that. But anyway, number 15, we'll talk about another 2-drop creature. This one I'm a little bit more attracted to, and that is Scourge of the Skyclave. Sort of a sort of Death Shadow. Again, you have to look at it really sideways for this to be Death Shadow, but it's obviously kind of a take on that card, and I, personally, freaking love it. This card looks dope to me, and I know that it's not going to be a great 2-drop in almost any game, which is one of the things keeping it like out of the top 10, because otherwise it might be in the top 10. But it's almost never going to be a good 2-drop. I think it's probably a much better 3-drop alongside a 1-drop. A 2-drop alongside another 2-drop on turn 4, or maybe a 2-drop alongside a 3-cost spell on turn 5, something like that. But it's almost never going to be the best 2-drop in the world. That said, we just got all these new lands in Standard that bolt us, obviously in Historic and Modern. We have fetch lands that we have to pay life for, that's Modern. We have, shock lands that we have to pay 2 life, and we've got these bolt lands in every format. So I imagine if you're at least doing some damage to your opponent with your aggro plan, you can deal some damage to yourself really, really fast in all of these formats, and probably even easier the farther back you go. So Scourge of the Skyclaves might be just good enough for for these older formats, but I'm probably sure it's locked out of modern play. That said, in Historic, looks like a dope card. And even in Standard, if you play this on like turn 4 and it's an 8/8, which it definitely could be depending on what's happened that game, then it's obviously worth your 2 mana investment. So I'm super excited about this card, but again, slightly tentative at the end of the day. Now, number 14 is Kazandu Mammoth. This might surprise you too, but I really like this card a lot. I guess you could also put a Comb Hellhound here. You know, just landfall creatures that get a bonus when a land comes into play. Maybe you could do that. But either way, I like Kazandu Mammoth a lot. I think it's almost like a sleeper in this set, but honestly, I felt like the card was so powerful that it can't really be called a sleeper. I think this is just powerful on its face, right? 3 mana for a 3/3 ain't half bad. You know, it's not the best deal in the world anymore by today's standards, but 3 mana for a 3/3 is at least on curve, but sometimes this is going to be a questing beast, or not a questing beast, a love-struck beast. I get them mixed up a lot. But this might just be the beast from Beauty and the Beast, in that it's effectively a 3 mana 5/5. You know, on the next turn after you play it. And in some cases, if you have ramp spells or Euro or whatever, this can be like a 3 mana 7/7 the turn after you play it. If you Genesis Ultimatum or something, get 3 lands off of it. You got a 9/9 on your hands. Absolutely crazy, but by the way, it's a land on the other side. Like, even if it wasn't a land on the other side, I'd be slightly impressed by this card, but it wouldn't be too much to write home about. With a land on the other side of it, suddenly this card is jacked, kids. So I actually really like this a lot, and I haven't talked much about it, and I haven't really seen other people talk too much about it. But, you know, when it comes to the Bolt cycle of lands, I put those in one entry on the list. When it comes to the uncommon MDFCs, the modal dual face cards, the lands, I put those at 1 slot on the list. They all get 1 slot. But when it comes to these rares, I definitely feel like there's a degree of separation between a fair amount of them, so they don't get their own slot on the list. I will actually be covering them separately. And even though this is the worst one that made the list at the rare slot, I still think that it's one of the ones that we should be paying the most attention to because it's fairly costed on the one side. That's the thing. A lot of these MDFCs are poorly costed on one side, and they're a crap land on the other. This is a crap land on one side, yeah, but you'll still use it as a land drop when you need it. But it's a fair card on the other. It's not a bad card. It breaks the rules of these cards because it's not bad. This is a fine card on its face. So I just really, really like this card, if you can't tell, and I'm advocating super hard for it, because a 3 mana 5/5 on most turns is probably, I'm fairly certain that's good. I've been taught that's good. Number 13 is Skyclave Shade. Now, we've seen a couple of black 2-drops in this set that are effectively sideways versions of older cards, right? Scourge of the Skyclave's kind of a Death Shadow a little bit, if you want to look at it that way. This card, kind of a Bloodghast, but fixed. Definitely fixed, because you actually have to pay the mana for the Bloodghast this time. But at least that gives you the option to kick it. So, honestly, just throwing a land down post-Wrath or something, and being able to, yeah, you have to pay 5 mana, but you still get a 5-power guy against control post-Wrath just for bricking on a land for the turn. That seems really good to me. And obviously, in decks that want to sacrifice creatures, or just decks that want to have a lot of graveyard synergy, decks that mill themselves, all of them seem perfect for this card. So even though we've got better options in much older formats at a card like this, I definitely think that this could rule Standard, at least in certain decks, replace cards like Gutterbones that we're going to be missing throughout this Standard, and do a really good job of giving us some form of Wrath protection in these mono-black aggro decks, and even, green-black decks and beyond. There's a lot of decks that can play a card like this because a recursive creature that can be 5 power against control decks is unbelievable. Wish it could block, right? But who cares? If all you're looking for is a recursive aggressive creature, this has the stats. But number 12 is another selection from the Skyclave. It's Skyclave Apparition this time. Again, I've seen this card in so many people's top 5s, top 10s, but at the end of the day, it's just kind of a removal piece, right? Like, I put it on the same level as, like, that 2-mana black sorcery from this set that allows you to kill enchantments. That should be on the list, too, so... sometimes I just do a removal entry on these lists, but I do think that Apparition is special compared to, Banisher Priest and Fiend Hunter and other stuff like this that we've seen in the past. If you get rid of their Death Shadow in Modern, they kill this, they get a 1/1 back. They get rid of their Tarmogoyf, they get a 2/2 back if they manage to kill this. In Standard and other formats, if you slap this down and exile their Euro, they can kill it, but then they get a whole 3/3 back. It's just not really, like against some of the most impressive creatures in some formats. This is just an all-star card because it takes out some of the best creatures and gives them back something in return, but in the scheme of things, nothing like the thing you exiled in the first place. So it's just much, much better than a creature like Fiend Hunter, Banisher Priest, or anything along these lines has been in the past. So I really like this, if you can't tell. This is a good creature, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's one of the, if not, the best iteration of this kind of creature we've ever seen. So it definitely deserves to be on the list, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of removal, and there's way more exciting stuff to talk about than that. Let's get to number 11, and this might surprise you, but number 11, actually just barely out of the top 10, kind of an honorable mention for the top 10, Leyline Tyrant. That's right, it didn't quite make it into the Big Ten. I apologize for that, but we really haven't seen this card do anything in the first few days of the format. No matter like how impressive it looked during spoiler season, it has to find a deck, and I'm not sure that it's found a deck. I'm not sure that it's going to find a deck. Yeah, big red. Looks pretty good for a card like this, but we're just not absolutely sure that archetype is going to be any good anytime soon. And at the same time, we're not absolutely sure that even if that archetype is good, that this card is the best card in that deck. I would imagine the best interaction in that deck is Ironcrag Feet into Ugin on turn 5. So, right. But Leyline Tyrant allows you to bank mana, so you can cast that Ugin a little bit faster too. I like that. And if they ever do kill the Leyline Tyrant, it ends up doing a buttload of damage to them if you have the untapped mana. So if you cast this off of Ironcrag Feet, you immediately get to bank 3 mana, which is a cool play. So there's a lot of awesome stuff about this card, and I like it a lot. But it has to prove that it is much more than a do-nothing 4-mana 4/4 flyer before it really makes it into the sort of upper echelons of cards in this set. But I famously put like Hydroid Krasis just barely outside of the top 10 of the set it was in, and look how that turned out. So we'll see. Maybe this is a way better card than we're gauging it right now, but it's got to prove itself. But you've made it to the big list, ladies and gentlemen. You held on, and you made it to this point of the video. What is number 10? Now, for number 10, I'm going to cheat a little bit. And I've already spoiled you on this. I told you I was going to do this, so don't be too surprised. But number 10 is the uncommon MDFCs, the modal double face cards that are spells on one half, lands on the other. These have already proven to be vital role players in multiple decks, especially Bala Ged Recovery, which has proven to become sort of an all-star already and is maybe the best of these. There's a whole bunch of other good ones. Drawry Disruption, the counterspell for 2 mana on one half, looks good to me. Selindi Vision, as far as we're talking about blue cards, that also looks very good to me. A lot of these uncommons look good. Some of them, again, not looking too hot, kind of booty, but at the same time, the ones that are good look very, very good, and I haven't even outlined all the ones that are very good, but just note that there are multiple, of these uncommon MDFCs that are already seeing play in multiple formats, all the way back to Legacy, the speculation is at least. So I'm telling you, these cards as a concept are going to change the game of Magic in what I think are fundamentally good ways that result in, richer, more complex deck building and mana-based building, and I'm really all for it. But the reason these actually ended up at number 10 is just because they're straight up powerful, not because they're innovative or they're going to change the way we look at the game and mana basis. All that is true, but it's really just because of the raw power of some of these that they actually come all the way up here on the list. These are good cards. And you're about to get sick of me talking about them. I hope not, actually, because I want you to finish this video. But anyway, number 9, Hagra Mauling. Yeah, it's another one of these, and so is the next card, just so you know. But I really like these modal flip cards. I've made no secret of that during spoiler season. I think that these are going to have a massive effect on multiple formats, and this is one of the absolute best of the bunch. Although not the best of the bunch, it's still way up there in priority. If I had to, just rank every single MDFC from the set, which I might actually make a video out of. That might be fun content, but if I had to rank all of them, this would definitely be like in the top 7, because I guess 5 of them are, better than all the, all the mythics are better than all the rares. But this would be like number 6 or 7 if I was ranking all of them, right? But just a removal spell on one side that's often just a murder, right? Or a land on the other to make sure you hit that land drop in your control deck. Card is unbelievable. I'm telling you, card's really good. And although we have some stuff in Standard that's already, you could make an argument for it over this. We just got Blood Chief's Thirst. That looks like an interesting little removal spell. We got Murderous Rider, right? I still think that in a lot of decks, you're going to prefer hitting that land drop, especially if you're running up against a deck that doesn't really play creatures, Control Mirror or something. This is an unbelievable card because now you'll just have a dead card sitting in your hand for the rest of the game. And obviously, whoever wins the resource war, you usually wins the control versus control matchup, so you need your land drops. And just not being dead against control makes this card way better than a whole lot of other removal spells, so it is definitely on this list. But number 8, if you thought I liked a single target spot removal spell that's a land on the other half, what about just a mass removal spell? What about a planar cleansing that's a land on the other half? That's right. Ondu Inversion is my number 8. I love this card. I see absolutely no reason why control decks that play white wouldn't play at least one, if not 2 copies of this card, right? Because, yeah, you might never get to 8 mana, but of course it mitigates the fact that it's an 8 mana card on one half by being a card you can play on any turn of the entire game on the other half of the card, right? But it also, in turn, just like all of these other, modal flip cards, it mitigates the problem with being a land on turn 9, right? You top deck it late in the game, and suddenly you've got a really nutso card, depending on the board state, right? So I love that this effectively costs the same amount of mana that Ugin costs, right? Because if they cast Ugin, then maybe on the next turn you cast Inversion. So there's all kinds of stuff that this just completely blows away literally everything on the table this can deal with, so long as it's not indestructible or whatever. So I just love this card. It's cool that we just lost Planar Cleansing, but now we have this, so which is in my mind a better card than Planar Cleansing on a lot of levels. So huge fan of Inversion, and again, I don't see how it doesn't end up in a whole bunch of control decks in multiple formats. Hey, Ziggy showed up, everybody. We love Ziggy. He's a good dude. But let's get to number 7 here, which is Nissa of Shadowed Bowels, one of the first, if not the first card on the list that I actually think I might be judging too highly. This is the only Planeswalker on the entire list. I didn't like Jace or Nahiri more than any other card that I put on the list, so they didn't make the list. That's how that works. But in terms of Nissa, I think this is probably the best Planeswalker in the set, although I have seen people saying good things about Jace, but I'll believe it when I see it. But anyway, Nissa, I'm very much attracted to this kind of Magic card right here. If it didn't have the landfall ability on it, I probably wouldn't like it anywhere near as much, but I've already seen a few people go off and get 10 loyalty on the turn this comes out, and suddenly you can just reanimate 2 dudes in the next couple of turns, and it gets really disgusting. But even if you're just making a 3/3 every turn with this, and I know it only lasts that one turn, but still, even if this just effectively is a 3/3 that gets to attack once per turn, that still could be worse, right? Especially if you're putting so much loyalty on it as your turns go on. But still, just the reanimation mode on this really sells this card for me. It looks like an amazing card for grindy, 2 and 3 color mid-range or even reanimator decks, because it's not going to be too hard to actually reanimate something with Nissa. In some cases, the turn she enters the battlefield, depending on what else you got going on. Play Nissa and then play Fabled Passage, pop the Fabled Passage, get something out of your yard. Seems like a pretty good play line, and in fact it is, because I've already seen multiple people do it at this point in the season. So Nissa just looks like an unbelievable card to me, but again, I'm a little bit worried that this shouldn't have been like number 15 or something. But I really like this iteration of Nissa, and if anything, I give kudos to Wizards for not making a Nissa that was insanely oppressive like the last Nissa. This at least looks a little bit more fair, but still a lot more fun to play, and might even make these grindy mid-range decks, not so much a thing of the past anymore. But I'll hold my breath on that. We'll wait and see. Either way, a card like this that'll help you grind into the late game looks fan-freaking-tastic. Now, all the way up here at number 6 is Thieving Skydiver. That's mostly because it's going to be really good in Modern and Legacy and Commander, where you can steal a Sol Ring on turn 1 or any number of other ridiculous garbage. It really depends on the power level of your Commander table, but the more powerful your Commander table is, the better Thieving Skydiver gets. But that's true in Legacy, where it can still Moxen for a whole lot of nothing, like 1 mana. I think you have to pay at least 1 mana. But also for in Standard, though, I wasn't even thinking about Standard. You can still steal Lucky Clovers and Stonecoil Serpents, and if you have enough mana, you can steal Embercleave, and that seems like a dumb play. So the card still does stuff in Standard, but the farther you go back and the more powerful the format is, the better this card gets. So it should easily be in the top 10, even if you never see it in a game of Standard, and you very likely will. It's going to be everywhere in other formats. Now, number 5 is Magmatic Channeler, and I had to really contain myself to not make this number 1 or number 2 on the list, right? But this is one of my personal favorite cards in the entire set, honestly. Just because I hate blanking, hate bricking on my turns, especially in my red decks where I don't have a whole lot of ways to draw cards and I'm down to nothing in my hand and I drew a land, I'm dead. So it's one of my least favorite experiences about the game of Magic. And with this card out, you will never brick again. If you draw a land, you get 2 more shots at drawing a relevant card that turn. And yeah, it could just be 2 more lands, but the chances of that are relatively low, and at least it's a lot better than if you didn't have a Magmatic Channeler. Plus, it's not going to be too hard to make this a 4/4 in a bunch of decks, This is the card for Izzet Spells. Forget Seagate Stormcaller. Don't forget Seagate Stormcaller. It's a good Magic card, but still. If I'm playing Izzet Spells and I have to put a 2-drop Wizard in the deck, this is the one I'm putting in, right? It's extra card advantage. It's not too hard to make it a 2-mana 4/4. There's just no way you can look at this card and not think that it's busted in multiple formats, by the way. I'm not just talking about standard here, but I'm talking about historic and modern and even possibly farther back than that. This card has a ton of potential. But number 4, you've probably been expecting this entire time. That's right. It's Lotus Cobra. Let's get it out of the way, y'all. Lotus Cobra is disgusting. It's gross in this standard environment. And I've already talked about this a couple of times, but I seem to remember the first time Lotus Cobra was printed into standard, it wasn't that big of a deal. But everyone's been telling me for the last week that the first time this card was printed into standard, it was unbelievably oppressive and it did all the most broken things. Well, if that's the case and I'm just misremembering things, then get ready for that again. Because the first couple of days of the format, people are already showing off exactly how broken Lotus Cobra is, especially in a format with Euro and a ton of different ramp things you can be doing, whether it's extra lands off of Azusa or Dryad of Elysian Grove, or you're playing like Migration Path or Roiling Regrowth or any of these ramp cards that put extra lands into play. The extra mana you get off of Lotus Cobra is in some ways completely, entirely broken and disgusting. So, and it's only been like 2 or 3 days we've had access to really play this card. People were already sounding the alarm before we even had access to the set, but now that we do have access to the set, it turns out that Lotus Cobra is every bit as dangerous and potentially toxic a card as we thought that it was during preview season. I'm sounding the alarm now. Lotus Cobra, kind of dumb. Make sure when you build your decks that you have answers to this card. It shouldn't be too hard, right? 1 toughness. But if you're just one of those decks that's trying to do all the cool, broken, fun stuff at the beginning of the format, you don't really pack too much removal, get ready to die to Lotus Cobra because it's going to happen. And one of the big reasons for that is number 3 on the list, and that is Omnath. Yeah, this card is all the way up here at number 3. It is easily one of the strongest cards in the set. And again, I think the first couple of days of play have helped to prove that. I don't think that the Omnath decks that are now flooding standard in the last couple of days are a fluke. I don't think that they're a misevaluation of the first couple of weeks of the format or anything. I don't think that it's just people in the early access event trying to have fun and then influencing the first couple of days of standard. No. I think that this is a legitimately bonkers powerful Magic card that I've already personally done a whole lot of really repulsive stuff with in just the few games I've gotten to play with it. 4 life a turn almost effectively shuts aggro decks out of the format, especially considering some decks are getting this on turn 3 after a Lotus Cobra. So if you're playing aggro, you better have a really, really good plan, some evasion, all that, because 4 life a turn off of Omnath is obviously extremely relevant against your plan. But the mana has proven very easy to get, the second, triggering of this ability. The mana has proven easy to get, and it's really broken, again, alongside Lotus Cobra, where when you play a land for the second time in a turn, suddenly you've generated 6 total mana off of just playing lands, not to mention you can tap a land. It's crazy. And then I've seen multiple people take out Ugins with the trigger, the third trigger on it. I'm so excited talking about this card I can barely speak English. But you know what I'm trying to say. The third trigger on it can take out Planeswalkers. I've seen it take out both Basri Cats and Ugins so far in this standard. So, all I'm saying is you'll hit that third trigger on this text box more often than you might think. So there's just so many ridiculous things about this card. It replaces itself immediately when it comes into play. That doesn't even seem fair that it draws you a card, but it does. Sometimes it draws you a land and you haven't even played your land for the turn yet, so you immediately gain 4 life. It's just an unbelievable card. Like if you go Euro on turn 3 and then this on turn 4 after you dropped your extra land from Euro. So you haven't dropped a land on turn 4. So you go Euro on turn 3, this on turn 4, then drop a land. What have you done? On turn 3, you gained 3 life, drew a card, dropped an extra land. On turn 4, you gained 4 life and drew an extra card. Like, how are decks supposed to compete against that. I'm telling you, Euro is it's just a gross Magic card. And you'll understand that soon enough if you don't yet. So what could possibly be number 2? It's Lithoform Engine, ladies and gentlemen. Mostly because of how good it is in Commander. Seriously. Like, honestly, I think, like, this is maybe, and I've said this before, but I want to reiterate it. I think this is probably the best Commander-specific card we've seen since Helm of the Host. Right? How much, if I went through all the things this can do in Commander, we'd be here all night. This would be a 5-hour video. And, I mean, you can make a whole video off of just all the combos that this has. Both in Commander and even Standard, Historic, Modern, Legacy, which it'll probably never see play in, but still. And one of the reasons this is on the list is not only because it's such a ridiculous powerhouse, obviously stupidly overpowered card in Commander, but also I could see this doing things in Standard and Historic. I'm not going to lie to you. It costs an awful lot of mana to get out, but we've proven that not only in this Standard, but the last Standard, read Historic, we can get tons of mana out before too long in a given game, so it wouldn't be too hard to hit Lithoform Engine on turn 3 and then start doing just really awful stuff with it on turn 4. I mean, you can copy permanent spells, bro. Like, it's just, Lithoform Engine looks like straight up dangerous, and I'm a little bit surprised that they printed this, but even if it doesn't do anything in like a competitive constructed format, watch out, Commander players. This is not only the best card in the set, it's the best card for Commander in like mini sets. But you've already guessed what number 1 is, because I told you that all the Bolt lands were going to have their own entry on the list, and we haven't talked about them yet, so you are a smart person who knows how to use the process of elimination. So with that in mind, number 1, these Bolt lands, people call them, I think people are calling all the MDFCs backyards, but I really like the idea of calling these backyards. These are dumb. These are dumb, and of all the MDFCs in this set, I think these might be the most likely to be a mistake. An actual mistake. But they are balanced somewhat. I'd say the blue one is probably the worst one, let's be honest here, but with the right cards in hand, the blue one is amazing, right? If you have 5 cards in hand, the blue one is suddenly really, really good. Aside from that, I do like all the other ones, right? I think the white one is probably the second worst, although the white one is still really good when you do cast it. I like the red one more than a lot of people like the red one. The green one is probably second best, and then I like the black one the most, Agadeem's Awakening. I think this is probably going to help out the most decks on day one. We've already seen decks in Standard playing it. Death Shadow decks in Modern are almost certainly going to play this card. As a matter of fact, decks all the way back in Legacy are likely to play this card because it's just free. It's free. The opportunity cost is effectively 0 to put this card into your deck or any of these, Bolt lands, because it costs you effectively the same as a basic. I mean, especially in some of these ramp decks, you have to play some basics. You have to play 10, 11 basics. So you don't have all the room for these cards. But in a lot of decks, even the ramp decks, you'll be able to find space for at least 1, if not 2, or even 4 copies of 1 or more of these lands. Again, the opportunity cost represented here is so unbelievably low that I can't see these cards not affecting literally every Magic format. But that's my take on Zendikar Rising. Again, there were a ton of cards that I didn't end up talking about. I know that people are going to be mad Null Priest wasn't on the list, and probably at least 10 other cards. Again, I wanted this thing to be like a top 50, but I settled on a top 25. That means I had to cut a lot of cards. And if I didn't put something on the list, I probably had it on the list at some point. So let me know down there in the comments section what cards I left out, what takes you don't agree with, and all that. Leave the Bolt lands alone. I'm telling you, those are good cards. If you still think those are bad, I don't know. They're good. They're good, guys. But anyway, that's all I've got for now. Just do all the YouTube stuff. I'll remind you again to like, subscribe for all the content this season. Deck Techs very soon. Follow me on Twitch. Watch me play the Magic the Gatherings at twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. And go to patreon.com/SBMTG to donate just $1 a month to the channel. You can pick out what content we do both here on YouTube and on Twitch. So do all that stuff. And if you want to pick up any of these cards, of course, go to Takog Player. They're my guys. They're where you get cards for cheap. But I'm done for now, and I'm pretty sure this video has ran extremely long. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Just get at me in the comments section, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love, and be kind.